Hi guys. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So yeah, as Frankie said, we're looking at expediting or speeding up the buying and selling process. We've got quite a nice mix of resi and commercial. So we're going to try and bounce back and forward between the two, trying to look at both in equal measure as much as we can. Just so you guys know a little bit about my background, I sit on the board at the UKPA. I joined at the start of this year. I have been an estate agent in residential for about 18 years. And I also have a PropTech company, which we've launched this year. Great timing. So, but yeah, very, very passionate about what tech can bring to various real estate processes, be that lettings or sales, and yeah, how that can be improved and streamlined, and particularly the selling process in the UK is notoriously laboured and slow, and actually I have to say I'm not entirely sure whether this impact has happened on the commercial side as well, but on residential side I know that the length of transactions has actually increased over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, rather than, like most things, decreasing with increased regulation and everything else. So really keen to hear some really great ideas and hopefully some sort of actionable plans about how we can try and improve that. So if we can try and jump around, if everyone is able to just do a very quick, short, sharp. It's going to be a bit of a free-for-all here, so this will be interesting to see how it goes. But if everyone can chip in just a very quick introduction, try and keep it super short and sweet, just who you are and your company and what you guys are about, and then we'll sort of crack on from there. I think once we've done introductions, I think we'll probably discuss around what we see as the biggest hurdles at the moment in the process, and then we'll bring that round onto discussions on how we feel that can be tackled and addressed. All right, so Valentina, that's how we'll do it. I'll shout people out and you can jump in and say who you are and what you do for the group. So yeah, we'll whip through these as quick as we can. So sorry, Valentina.
Absolutely. Hi everyone, Valentina Shigoyan. I'm a managing partner at Reach UK. Reach belongs to Second Century Ventures, which is a VC fund backed by the National Association of Realtors in the States. We are looking for technologies that help realtors or estate agents or real estate professionals do their jobs better. So this topic is highly relevant to us.
Great, thanks for that. Stefan?
Yeah, morning everybody. I'm Stefan Davis. I work for AS Watson, acquisition manager for Central London, and chartered surveyor for about 4 or 5 years. I'm quite keen to understand how, like you say, how tech can sort of enhance my buying of retail units throughout the UK.
Great, thanks. Philip? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, Philip Farrell is my name. I'm Chief Commercial Officer of a company called Offer. It's a new online technology we've already launched in Ireland, hence my Irish accent. But however, our key market will be the UK and Australia, which we'll be launching into in the next 2 months. It's a it's a technology for estate agents to expedite the sales process. At the moment, it's 190 days on average. And this addresses the administration and communication side of the house where most of the delays take place. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Philip. Sammy, do you want to do a quick, or should we just stick with the new members? Say a quick hi, I think.
Yep, hi everyone. I think you all know who I am. I just want to say that I think this is a really interesting topic that I know many of you are very passionate about. It's something that is talked about quite often in terms of the length of time it takes to buy and sell a property. I do think that PropTech can help speed up that process and make it more efficient and transparent. So interested to hear today what you're all doing in that space. That's it.
Right. Here's Sammy. Gal?
So hi, I'm Alvin Five from Waveline. We're a micro VC specializing in property construction and infrastructure related technologies. We're based in both the UK and in Israel, and we focus on early stages, so seed and pre-seed.
Dan?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Dan Montagnani. I principally run a business called Groundshaw, which is an information business supplying data through various channels, principally conveyancing for both residential and commercial property. Obviously, interested in today's topic, not least from the point of view that we can see more than half of all transactions that are going through at any one time, and I can tell you that Resi is below, at the moment, about 50% of its natural run rate. Commercial seems to be showing a little bit more resilience, but I don't think we're yet through the curve piece, which is people working through the pipeline that's existing. So we've yet to see the full cliff edge of new deals not coming online, basically.
Right. Cheers, Dan. Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Taylor. I'm a partner at Clifford Chance. Clifford Chance, a large international law firm. We focus heavily in the commercial space. We do occasional high-end resi, but not the sort of normal conveyancing. I'm particularly interested in this. I look after PropTech for the UK. So actually very interested in how we can cut down the process, because oddly, we actually don't have as many lawyers as some of our competitors. We're focused on high-end things so that we can make it shorter. It's actually much more efficient for us as well. So yeah, anything we can do in this space is great.
Right, thanks, Matt. Anna Maria?
Hi, I'm Anna Maria from Infobot. We are the home of information for real estate industry, partnering with nearly 1,000 companies, hosting over 600 pages of research, news, and insights from around the globe. We help speed up the research and the buying and selling process, and we are keen to speak to companies that produce content or need access to it.
Great, thank you. Christian?
Hi there. Yeah, Christian Woodhouse from Search Acumen. We're suppliers of land and property data to the conveyancing market, typically residential and commercial, but in the moment it forms a lot of PDF reports, but the future clearly is not that, and it's about the data. And we're pushing the use of that data through our online geospatial platform, which clients can interact with and see data about individual properties and areas at the touch of their fingertips.
Brilliant. Cheers. Michelle? Don't forget to unmute yourself, Michelle.
Thank you, Christian. It's too early in the morning for me. Hi everyone, I'm Michelle. I work at Hayes McIntyre. I'm a tax advisor. Hayes McIntyre, a mid-tier size accountancy firm. So we offer all kinds of tax and accountancy services. Two of our specialist sectors are property and technology. In the PropTech space, I'd say this is one area that really interests me, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and I'll wait to pitch in until after the introductions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Ross?
Morning, everybody. My name is Ross Cooney. I'm CTO of IM Property. We're primarily a nationwide auction house, but beyond the auction, we also manage a lot of the completion. So we own conveyancing firms, also compliance, and some other move-related services. Our USP is speed and security. We're the fastest, most securest way to transact in property at the moment.
Are you primarily resi, Ross, or commercial, or both?
Primarily resi.
Oh, good to know. Great, thanks for that. Natasha?
Hi, everyone. My name is Natasha Terenova. So I'm probably going to repeat something that Valentina said. I'm a UK director of REACH, which is a scale-up program, fully backed by Second Century Ventures, which is a strategic fund of National Association of Realtors, and we are looking for technologies in PropTech that are making life of estate agents easy.
Great. John? John Bennett?
Yep. Hi, I'm the digital man for Global X. We provide corporate and property data information, stuff like the ground shore reports for residential sales, but we recently just started creating more software. So we've got conveyancing software for both residential and commercial.
Brilliant. Nathan?
Yeah, I'm Nathan. I'm the Business Development Director for Spaceflow. We're a tenant experience solution. We're covering multiple markets, including residential and commercial, and we're operating in 13 different countries. So it'd be good to hear the perspective of the UK market.
Great. And I think last but not least, Jonas.
Hi, good morning. I work for Oakwood, which is a service apartment company. And it's my first meeting here, so I'm more listening in than speaking, I think, this time.
No problem. Thanks for joining us, Jonas. Okay, so that I think, is anyone not introduced themselves yet? Speak now. All right, fab. Okay, great. All right, so I think best place for us to start, and I think what we said, guys, is just for now, jump in if you've got something to say. If it becomes a little bit of a free-for-all, then we'll review it. We might have to do either physical waving, and I'll try and hop between screens to spot people putting their physical hand up, or you can put your virtual hand up, and Frankie will see and can sort of guide the conversation that way. So does anyone want to jump straight in and sort of highlight what they see as the biggest hurdles in the process? What are the sort of main issues that we really feel we need to tackle to speed up this buying and selling process? And again, doesn't matter if it's resi or commercial. I think probably one thing just to say when you jump in, probably quite good to preface it with just, because obviously we've done the intros, but we won't always be able to remember exactly who does what. So if you just jump in and just start off by saying whether you're talking resi or commercial or both, just gives us all the ability to sort of frame what we're hearing a little bit better. But yeah, who would like to sort of jump in first of all and sort of highlight what they see as the biggest hurdles at the moment in the buying and selling process? Anyone? Okay. So here's a question for you guys. So one of the things that I've found in similar conversations I've had seems to be more about the availability of data and the sharing of data that is required through the process. Now, quite a lot of people think quite a unique part of solving that is about establishing a UPRN, or a unique property reference number, that is sort of unilaterally adopted by any party dealing with any property in any manner. So whether you're buying or selling, but even if you're a utilities provider, an asset manager, it doesn't matter. What do people think about that, and what opportunities do people think a UPRN could bring to transactions? Don't be afraid, guys. This is a round table. We do need some of you to jump in.
UPRNs have recently been made, well, will be made open as of July by Geospatial Commission, and they will include a coordinate as well. So although UPRNs would, I think, yeah, definitely incredibly useful to be able to identify individual properties, but we can do that spatially, right? So we can, if we've got coordinates, we can spatially join things together as well. So it definitely helps. I don't think it's crucial, but it's definitely a big step forward, certainly. We've been trying to join data sets together for years. Doing it by address is just fraught with danger because people use loads of different addresses and they're matching stuff. But yeah, having an individual open UPRN certainly, I think, will help.
Yeah, Philip. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yeah, from a more macro level, my background is I've ended up in PropTech. My background, I was 30 years in a state agency, and what I think is really important is that, you know, we're all on this call and we're in a very lucky position, although none of us really feel that at the moment for obvious reasons because of all the challenges that are going on. But it's an industry where there's huge opportunity at the moment because it is so less advanced than most other sectors. But one of the things that I'm acutely aware of, I'm finding with agents, is that it's very important to bring the estate agency business along with you, the estate agents themselves, because what you need to remember is that and this is just my own personal experience, is their expertise is not technology and never will be technology. They will see technology as an opportunity to improve their service. But a lot of them who don't understand technology need to be educated and convinced of that. So I think we need to be very careful in that we arrive along with all of this wonderful technology, and we all obviously are totally committed to our product and we're reinventing the wheel, and which is great. But it won't happen unless we bring the industry along with this. And that won't happen overnight. And I'm not being negative in saying that. I'm just saying it's very much, I'm finding, taking these estate agents by the hand because you have them in an area that they're not comfortable with in a lot of cases.
So I know that we've seen sort of in the resi space, there's been a few companies that have come to the fore, probably trying to resolve the communications issues along a chain, very much in the resi space. So companies like View My Chain, who have been a UK PropTech member for quite a long time. More recently, there have been the likes of Mio. In the resi conveyancing space, you've also got My Home Move, who have their own sort of progress tracker on their platform, and also the Partnership, another big resi conveyancing one, brought out quite a good sort of dashboard that isn't necessarily pulling anything new together, but just brings a lot more transparency to the process and what's involved in that process. Is anyone on here in the commercial space seeing similar innovation in the commercial space? Are you guys facing similar issues in there?
I mean, from what I see, there's much less of a sort of push towards sort of cloud platforms or things in the commercial space, and that's largely because I think the issues are slightly different. They're less about communication there, largely because you don't get the sort of chain phenomenon, which I think helps a lot. That said, there are sort of some platforms around, like I think CloudScrape is one, and things like that. They've got to hit a critical mass, and there's an adoption problem with that. Certainly, some ways it would help, but I think again, it's probably there's different markets at the super kind of hundreds of millions, £billion level. You're probably not going to use a cloud platform for that ever. At the sort of lower value level, I could kind of see it potentially taking off, but you've got to get the adoption threshold enough. No one wants to jump onto a platform until there's enough groundswell to make it worth investing in it.
So Matt, when you talk about onto a cloud platform, so interesting, it seems like you're viewing that there's sort of a singular, potentially a singular solution, or that's one opportunity available. Interesting for me coming into this, I sort of see this a lot more about sort of data sharing being probably the biggest hurdle, definitely in resi. It's all about collating all those data sets to assess risk and compliance, etc., which I don't necessarily see as a singular place, right? It's about different data sets being able to be accessed by relevant parties as and when. So when you say you don't see big transactions happening in a digital environment,
I think that's more in the sense of a sort of all-in-one platform with a nice progress tracker and how things are. Yeah, they're just not. They're so bespoke and have so many odd factors that pop up. You know, you've got a tax structuring issue in Luxembourg and sort of something out that just wouldn't ever work with that. But I mean, what we are seeing more is bits of the issue becoming much more cloud-based. but everything with its own problem. So we used to have physical data rooms where you'd go in as a lawyer and physically sit in a room and go through files. That's gone more or less now. It's all digital, thankfully. Ordering searches is much more digital and much more user friendly now, so that's a sort of separate piece. Reporting is becoming more digital in sort of firms, like we use some online platforms to store it. Negotiating, we do put documents up into some platforms. Email is still predominant. So I think what you're right, a lot of sort of different pockets are being put together, and trying to make data move through all that sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. I think if I was sort of putting the single biggest point of delay, I think there's some bits which are sort of well known around the sort of search areas where you've got local authorities and things still responding, and they're still pulling information out of drawers and physically sort of typing it across. I think the other sort of big area is, it's a techie legal one, but we live in caveat emptor, so the buyer beware. And actually, okay, you do get vendors pulling together sort of vendor DD and sort of offering limited reliance, but at some level the onus is always on the buyer to redo the due diligence, even if the sort of seller did it a couple of years ago. And that's the bit that takes a lot of time from the legal process.
So I appreciate, generalizations and overview stats aren't necessarily all that accurate, but I mean, compared to the resi space, so in the resi space, I think I'm right in saying that the average transaction time from offer to completion now is somewhere between 16 to 18 weeks in the UK for a resi property. And roughly between 40 to 50% of all transactions fail at least once before they get through. How does that compare to commercial?
I think there was one of the studies that came out recently. I think it was sort of the average length is sort of, once it gets into lawyers' hands, is about 3 months or so, which is probably about right from experience. Some go very quickly, some you'll do in a couple of weeks if necessary, if the circumstances are right. Some go longer. Yeah. I think the failure rate, certainly once it's in lawyers' hands, is low, largely because at that point the commercial deal's done, and it generally takes something materially wrong or a material shift in the market or something like that to knock it off course. But I don't know if anyone else has a sort of view. I think it's a bit different before it gets into lawyers' hands, where there's obviously a much more sort of ups and downs in the commercial terms. So the outline commercial terms are being agreed.
I mean, that's quite an interesting point, that there seems to be potentially more due diligence almost at an earlier stage, which then prevents. Anyone else want to jump in on that? Be that other viewpoint on commercial or resi, doesn't matter.
Is Dan Montagnoli here. Is there not a fundamental difference between those two markets, though, where you've got sophisticated buyers who are going to do an element of pre-due diligence before they commit themselves to abortive transaction fees? And in the resi market, you've got unsophisticated customers that have got that do this once every 10 years, half of whom haven't actually sorted out their finance yet. Are there not two? I mean, I know we're all sitting here looking at this from a sort of PropTech point of view. How do we fix it? But I think the two markets are fundamentally different when you've got two very different contrasting cohorts of buyers.
You've also got a third cohort, and that is auction. Auction is unique, and our contract is 56 days with a 3% fall-through rate, and that's just because of the reservation agreements we get people to sign. But we'd be able to go much faster if searches weren't so slow, expensive, were automated perhaps, were cheaper, had a unified standard. These are things that slow us down and slow every conveyancer down. It's expensive, and often these reports are run multiple times by all sides in the transaction. It's
Ross, can I just jump in on that? Can I ask why the cost of the searches is relevant? Because if you're saying they're expensive, if they could be delivered faster but were even more expensive than they are now, would that be a problem? I mean, is cost genuinely a problem in that process, or is it more about the time?
Good point. Maybe cost isn't an issue. Maybe speed is an issue. Maybe consistency is an issue. We have teams of people just reading documents. It's expensive. It just costs a phenomenal amount of money. So the cost of procuring the document is one thing. The cost of processing it is another. We've tried our best with AI, and we have an AI project running to hopefully be able to automate some of the processing of these documents. But the reality is, it is a time-consuming and expensive process, and ripe for innovation. Absolutely ripe for innovation.
Anyone want to jump in and follow on the back of that? Anyone got any thoughts on moving that?
And yeah, another reason why the speed is more important for residential than commercial, indeed echoes the point made on the type of buyer we are dealing with. In residential space, we are dealing with private individuals with own preferences, and quite often that's what is called an emotional buy. So you want this terrace, you want this flat just because you like it. In commercial space, speed is probably less relevant, and that's why the failure rate is by far lower, because indeed we are dealing with professionals who look to buy for investment purposes largely. So for them, what matters is the cash flow their property generates, commercial due diligence that they undertake over the course of those 3 months. And then it almost becomes tick in the box exercise. And it doesn't matter whether it runs for 1 month or for 3 months, the ultimate buyer, being institutional buyer, is unlikely to change mind. While when we talk about residential, that the longer the transaction lasts, the higher the probability that people would just change their mind. They just want something else. That just, they no longer love this flat in 3 months because, for whatever reason, quite frankly, because things moved on in their lives. That's why that is of high relevance. That's why you have these high failure rates as well, which are irrational if you think of it sometimes, but that's just how it is. We are dealing with an end user, a consumer in this case.
Thanks, Valentina. Anyone else want to jump on the back of that? I mean, what I'm hearing here is, so interestingly, just talking to the sort of commercially orientated people in the discussion at the moment, that's quite some interesting points about maybe time isn't such an issue in the commercial. I mean, I'm just sort of bringing this round to obviously the fact that the roundtable discussion is about the speed of the buying and selling process. So looking at the commercial space, is there a timing problem? Is there a frustration within the commercial transaction market around the time frame, or
there's always, I mean, if you ask our clients, they will always want it done faster. We're always, as lawyers, under huge amount of pressure to deliver the due diligence results or complete the transaction as soon as possible, you know, and it'll always be pushed to, can you do it in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? And yeah, some of that is volume of paper. You know, at some level it takes, yeah, I can put a big team on it, but you've still got to review that, you know, buckets of paper. Some of it is how long it takes some searches to come back. That's often one limiting factor that can be. But no, I mean, people want it done as soon as possible. I mean, the present situation is a perfect example that if you wait, you're always vulnerable to a sort of some sort of economic change, either in the market level or with the sort of buyer or the seller, that means actually the deal is no longer attractive. So it's still absolutely a sort of paramount consideration, just probably for slightly different reasons.
I would second that on the financial and tax due diligence side, because we have to do quite a lot of those on commercial transactions, and I'd say that we are always under pressure in terms of the time scale, and getting everything done as soon as possible, and finding everything out that we can from the vendor and making sure that everything is all, you know, all in order as it should be. There are also other pressures that come in, like, so for example, we had one recently where we had a buyer selling 6 hospitals, and then because of this whole coronavirus situation, we were under immense pressure like a month ago, that had to literally complete as soon as possible. I mean, we were already under pressure anyway, but then because of coronavirus, it became even a bigger issue. So I think whilst I think there is definitely more PropTech and more room for PropTech in the residential space. The commercial side still has its own time demands.
So are we sort of saying and agreeing, and this would probably be across both sectors then, that there's just at the moment there's not enough digital data on individual assets? There's still too much in print in boxes sat somewhere?
Yeah.
I'd agree.
I mean, on the commercial side of the bit, what is we are fundamentally doing as lawyers at the point of the DD process is we're reviewing, in most cases, things like leases, more so than necessarily the title docs, but reviewing the underlying leases and looking, are they good leases? Yeah, and they're all, in the UK, it's one of the sort of worst in that they're all in very different forms, even potentially within one building.
Yeah.
So if you had a digital, you move to the smart contract digital lease side of things where everything is somewhat more standardized, you don't need to repeat that every time, because you can actually see, well, this is either a standard form of lease, or we know what the one form of lease is that we review, and then all the actual financial data can just be sort of sucked out by the buyer and done at that level. So that would reduce the amount of work we would be doing significantly.
Great. I mean, I would say that
and probably
applies
allowing us to focus more on the high value
resi
stuff.
side as well, sort of a uniformity of lease. I know from my limited experience in the resi sales space, the leasehold side of things is interesting, and like you said, there seems to be no uniformity. Is anyone aware of any projects around that space, either resi or commercial, that are looking to try and establish some sort of standardized leasehold agreement?
There's been a few over the years, like the City of London Law Society and things have tried to put out model commercial leases. I think the trouble is to take
what's typically caused that.
A bit of it is sort of, well, why what's the upside in taking it up when you don't have the rest of the problem solved? Which is, you have a standard form which is helpful, and then people negotiate and chip away. If you could actually bring it all more into a sort of digital twin or a smart contract form as well, then you get a bit more upside to it, which is, yes, you're constrained in what you can negotiate, but when you try to buy or sell, you get the upside, which is the speed, and you can pull all this data out. Without that, you get a bit of simplicity, but it's kind of, you still have paper copies and have to extract all the information out. And so I don't think the sort of real benefits of it have been revealed, which means difficult to persuade people to take it on.
I think that the smarter way of doing that, instead of creating model leases where indeed everyone is going to try and negotiate something special and have all the right to do that in the market economy, is rather to develop a solution, and there are a number of startups that are doing that extracts information from leases which are written in different forms, extracts it into a standard form, the most important commercial clauses come into the form that is readable and digestible, and that ultimately can be put into large Excel spreadsheets or any other analytical tool that helps to systematize this data during the commercial due diligence process, for example, or legal due diligence process as well. So I think these are the solutions that technology is offering us, when there is no need anymore for lawyers to read through those papers and digging out for the relevant information bits here and there. We have the AI algorithms doing that for us, and then the error that I hear those programs produce is less than 1% or so. So that if that is indeed the case, then I think it's a good way around that.
We've looked at quite a few and actually trained a couple internally, and we do use them. The issue we've got is, I think it works really well from a commercial due diligence point, because you're extracting the sort of dollars and dates that you're interested in to populate your asset management systems and things. The trouble is, from a legal perspective, what it doesn't do is do kind of analysis on, is this a good lease, bad lease? And actually, if you're looking at a sort of an assignment clause and you find that there's a sort of an odd nasty in there, the AI won't pick up that because it's very text driven. Certainly, and you have to read the whole document because you never quite know there is something that is unique and bespoke at the end. So I agree, it's certainly part of the solution, definitely so on the commercial side. We've just not found, certainly on high value stuff, that we've been able to kind of get there with it. It's not an accuracy problem. It's what they're tending to look is extract financial information more so than is this a good lease or bad lease? And that's where having stuff more standard, you're never going to get it perfectly standardized, but the combination of having a more standardized form so that you don't get this nasty clause or this, or doing it more like a construction contract often is, which is here is a schedule of the alterations to it and they're at the back, so you only have to review a couple of pages. That may be a promising approach to try and help the legal side
I
of it.
was just going to jump in and say that, Matt. Are we talking about, because like you said, maybe trying to get agreement on a standardized lease is maybe a little bit optimistic, but maybe adopting a structure of lease, like you said, like you just suggested about construction. So yeah, the order and manner in which things are put together and specific locations for specific data. I mean, maybe is that where we maybe need to be looking at? Because then again, looking at how tech can tackle those things, I would have thought the more organized it is, the better, the more robust that solution can be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a very helpful way that would help both on the kind of tech and the commercial DD side and on the legal side, because you could then slice and dice. You wouldn't have the problem of playing hunt the nasty clause in the 300-page lease agreement, because you can spot them a bit more easily.
And I would imagine that will work across Resi as well, because like I said, Resi, I know leasehold and any leasehold transaction in Resi, going through the head lease, et cetera, and the due diligence on that tends to be the most convoluted and where the problems tend to occur. Anyone else want to add anything more on the lease structure?
Just a quick question to Matt, probably. Speaking about tech to analyze leases, Matt, have you looked at anything where they're actually doing sort of pattern recognition, so things like luminance, which is designed to actually identify those nasty clauses only in the sense that it identifies something is different about that clause from the thousands of similar clauses it's looked at before?
Yeah, we've looked at a range of different technologies. Lex Predict. We've looked at a couple of other bespoke ones. We looked at. I think we have looked a bit at luminance as well. The problem is certainly we found with English and Welsh leases in particular is they all say the same thing, but in a 1,000 different ways. I mean, we did an exercise of pulling down about 700 leases, which we'd scattered around the UK, different sizes, different landlord types, to try and train some AI tools with it. And the variety of ways to say the same thing is so big that actually you would make, I mean, it may be possible if you had a mammoth enough data set, but that would have to be truly mammoth, I think, to try and sort of organize what was good and bad. And the trouble is, one word here, one word there, that may be a big difference. So not saying it could never happen, but at the moment, I've not seen anything that gets there on the legal side. At the moment, the main use we've got of those sort of tools is doing kind of effectively very like advanced word searching more than anything. So they're great if we want to sort of quickly see, is there a change of control clause in this in this sort of data set? They're not so great in telling us if every contract in this data set is a good data set, or is a good contract or not.
Okay, thanks.
Can you guys hear me okay? My internet connection was playing up a little bit there. Yeah, good. Okay, cool. So, okay, so let's put a pin in the leasehold discussion for now, because I think what I'm hearing there is, I think there's a couple of things there about there's probably that's a real big data thing at the moment, and it doesn't look like we've necessarily got access to the size of data that would be able to crack that issue, if that issue can even be solved by the sound of it. So something else that came up when we talked about both resi and commercial, aside from the lease, the other thing that both people mentioned was about searches. So what can be done in that space? What can we do to exploit there? What are there patterns of data sets in there that are common issues for being slow? Are there particular parts of the country where that data is slow? Are there any patterns in that people have noticed that maybe people could learn from and look to tackle?
So the main issue really is usually around local authorities and getting access to their data. Typically, there's a time frames mentioned, but we're typically delivering searches, all searches. So that's local authority searches, enviros from ground shore or flood risk, that kind of stuff. Within most of those, like the ground shore stuff is minutes typically, but it's the local authorities where they take anything between 2 working days and 20 working days. So, but we're typically delivering stuff around 10 on the whole. So 10 working days out of 16 weeks is not an awful lot. So I don't think necessarily, yes, it's not as fast as it could be, but I don't think really it's what holds transactions up. I think that's a bit of a myth. We can certainly do things much faster if we had the data, and we've been pushing local authorities for the actual data for many years, and we're providing some data already in our spatial platform from City of London, Cheshire East, and places around the country who provide their data online. But they're a handful, right, out of 325 different local authorities.
Is there anything to be said about championing those councils that are more digitally savvy, that are more adoptive and more sharing with their data?
Yeah, we've tried to do some pieces with City of London around making that known. And I know land registry in their local land charges register, which is sort of digitising that, which is a great initiative, but it's just very slow. So that's one part of one of the legal searches from the local authorities. And then I think we're up to maybe 9-10 local authorities now. I'm not quite sure. I can't remember. Just
out of 325.
Yeah, and that process started about 6 years ago. So, yeah, they're getting there, but it's just incredibly slow.
Christian, what's your? If we let the local authorities and the land registry run the natural course of their current stunning project, we might be there in the 22nd century. And so I always look at this and say, well, look, the market wants to be able to answer 108 questions on a Con29R form. Well, when the market decides that it doesn't need to answer 109 questions on a Con29R form, then we'll do it, in seconds. Until that point, and we're back to the point, the lawyers asking for that. That's become that form is, my understanding is that form is not a mandatory requirement, but it's almost become a de facto mandatory requirement because mentally it's linked to the LLC1, which is a mandatory requirement. And we end up now in an interesting place where many local authorities are shutting down or shut down, and that data is not necessarily available. And so, will conveyancers accept, 10, 12, 20 key planning question answers that we could all get digitally and give them a different product? I think it's an interesting, almost the constraint of the current circumstances question. But I think when you typically ask a conveyancer, would you be prepared to not do a Con29R? They look at you as if you just suggested something completely unreasonable. And it's interesting because we've surrounded ourselves with a lot of process here, and a lot of process requires a lot of data. And look, I bought properties a few times in my life, and I don't think the Con29R really made a lot of difference. I personally, I did my own, due diligence, but if I look at the questions on that form, what's it telling me? Probably not a lot.
No.
I don't know what your customers think. I mean, a slightly controversial way of looking at it, but
Yeah, I would say that. Well, if you look at take the City of London, not necessarily they're more of a supplier rather than a customer, but they don't want to do Con29. So that's why they put all their data out there. They said, you guys want this data, here it is, go and get it. We don't want to be the ones processing official Con29 internally. They want to get rid of that process totally because it doesn't really make them any money and it's just a pain. So they'd rather have their data structured and out there so that people can access it. I mean, like I say, they're a bit more forward thinking. From a client's point of view, yeah. I mean, I think if you would say to him, we've got this product here, it answers a whole lot of questions, but it's not all of you're historically used to, and we've insurance back the rest, then they would probably take that. I think you'd have a few questions from some, but I think a lot of people, and as you rightly say, in this current climate where getting access to official searches can be hard, I think they would definitely take that because in their own minds, I think a lot of it, you're right, isn't really required anymore and is a bit outdated. But I'm not a lawyer, so
to me, it's one of those things you don't need it until you do, because 90% of the time it doesn't reveal anything, but then it does, and that's when you do find you find that a highway isn't adopted leading up to the property. And actually the issue, I think this probably spans both resi and conveyancing, is going to be less the actual purchaser and more any bank, because the banks, and often, particularly with the resi conveyancers, because they represent both the buyers and often usually the sort of the mortgage provider as well. They have to order that stuff because the bank wants it.
Interesting
and
you
if they
brought
don't,
that in, because that's actually something I was going to throw in off the back of this, is where is this sort of due diligence request coming more from, the actual buyer party or the lender involved? So interesting that you're suggesting that's probably more lender than buyer. Not always, of course, I can appreciate that. Now, off the back of that, I heard someone say something quite interesting yesterday, the day before, very much talking about, it was actually Russell Quirk yesterday. He was talking about how quickly the banks have moved to pull a lot of their mortgage products in light of everything that's happening. I think sort of 3 of the big 5 have pulled anything in resi lending more than 60% of value. Now, quite an interesting thing that he said was that obviously, the last recession we had, 2008, the banks behaved very, very similarly. It contracted the market, and we sort of had to wait for lending to loosen up for the market to sort of regain traction again. But he had a very interesting point, which was 10 years ago, we didn't have all the challenger banks that we have now, your Revoluts and your Starlings and et cetera, et cetera. Is this another area of opportunity for these challenger banks, not only to look at potentially a slightly different approach to lending and risk, but also maybe in terms of, these data sets, like you said, you only need it when you need it, but maybe there are ways to identify properties where you can pretty much eliminate the need for it. I don't know, like, for example, in a block of flats, if you can see that 3 other flats in that development have sold recently with similar lenders and it's got through that due diligence, then you can pretty much accept that, the lease on that is not going to be materially different to those other 3 flats, and maybe that can move a little bit faster. I don't know. I'm just thinking, is there maybe an opportunity for the more tech savvy banks out there who have disrupted the marketplace in 5 years? Is this another area for them to look to innovate? Anyone have any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, I think, and this is something that we hadn't touched on until now, obviously, is that with the traditional property transaction, whether it be residential or commercial, you have as we know, it's as I alluded to earlier, and as we know, it's a very traditional and staid, archaic process, which we've inherited from common law 150 years ago, and it's way behind the curve. However, if you look at the current situation, you have three large industries who are apart to a transaction. So you have the real estate industry, you have the legal sector, but you also have the mortgage, the banking sector. And there's no point in us addressing to speed up the transaction, whether it be the conveyancing or the searches side or the offer piece, which we're involved in, unless we're talking and bringing in the banks as well. Because fundamentally, 50 to 60% of all transactions will require finance, and 90% of properties that are purchased in the UK are bought with conditions attaching, and hence a lot of sales fall out of bed. So I think ultimately we need to be very clear that the banks must be brought in on this as well. It's a collaborative approach because there's no point in speeding up the transaction if the lending facilities can't be expedited as well in parallel with that.
And on lending side, one more thing to add is that when lenders provide mortgages, they provide them against the borrower, which is the private individual, and real estate is only used as a collateral. That's why, at least in residential space, due diligence of real estate is important, but it's again largely tick in the box exercise. It mortgage is rarely not provided because real estate doesn't meet the standards on value or tech side of things. More important is the information that mortgage providers have on private individuals and how they assess the credit of their borrower. And that's where I think there are already a number of solutions where, for example, you as a leaseholder, by paying your lease, it does count towards your credit scoring that then banks like Revolut are looking to take into account when providing mortgages. So that's where the standard mortgage system is somewhat failing, when they keep looking at standard income ratios instead of looking more broadly. And now, especially with freelance jobs, with people working on contracts, it's another one where banks need to speed up a little and start scoring correctly the ability of people to actually service their debt, even if they are not full-time employed, even if they work on contracts and their income stream is not that regular, so there are spikes, ups and downs, but they're still a very credible borrower. So that's, I think, where the mortgage providers need to catch up a little, and that's again where Revoluts of this world have an advantage.
Okay, so thinking about obviously trying to take stuff out of this that we can hopefully try and action and try and get some sort of traction, are we saying that maybe some sort of discussion involving as many banks and lenders as possible? It sounds like it's a pretty critical part of this discussion, right? Yeah. Okay, so Sammy, Frankie, if we can put a pin in us having a chat about that as a board after this, and maybe putting together some comms going out to all the banks, but in particular focusing on the challenger banks, on the and just seeing what engagement we can get there and whether we can have that discussion, because that sounds like that would be an interesting one. Anyone want to add anything more about that particular sort of lender area?
Nationwide are doing some good stuff at the moment, I hear, in terms of using land and property data to assess mortgage applications. So Rob, what's his surname? Can't remember his surname. But he's sort of spearheading that, and they are accessing data at the mortgage application side and making decision calls on those applications within 30 seconds, I think it is. So they're taking advantage of the data at the moment. So that'd be good. Rob Stevens, his name. He's a good chap.
So definitely good to learn about what they're doing, but I think also potentially good to try and get as many of them in the same space as possible, even if it's a space like this, even if it's for each other to be, even if it's just to get them to fire some shots across each other's bows, right? To show that they're they're starting to innovate and move and hopefully kickstart some of their competitors to challenge them in that space. Are we agreed that might be quite a good area to look at for us as the UKPA to try and okay. So something else I'm going to say, unless anyone else wants to add anything on that particular sort of lender space. No, cool. Something else I wanted to ask now about this process, and I think this question has already been asked quite a few times, particularly in the last few years in the resi space. I'm intrigued to see if it applies in commercial as well. Quite a lot of the dialogue I hear about a transaction being faster and a better success rate is actually about a lot of this data being collated much earlier. About a lot of this data really setting a mandate that if you want to sell a property, be that residential, be that commercial, and I appreciate, you know, you would have different data sets with each of those, and some data sets will need to be live data. But is there anything to be said about looking at the way a property is prepared for sale, so that a lot more of this data is secured before you go to market, so that then potentially when you're putting that asset in front of a buyer, it's 95% due diligence pre-done? And then want to jump in on any thoughts around that space?
Yeah, I'll jump in, John from Global X here. Have you looked at the Council of Licensed Conveyancers 2030 report?
I have
read that. Okay, so that's their vision of where conveyancing will go in the next 10 years. And one of their big things is upfront information. They're on about creating these home information packs or BASPs, they're saying. And they're saying at the moment it's only about a third of the data is collected up front. And so they see is one of the big things of really speeding up conveyancing is getting the seller to give more information up front. Standardization of data informs everything, and using AI and automation to really speed that up. So it's good to see when the regulators out there actually pushing this as well, because I think that's an important part, having a regulator out there who's pushing AI, automation, gathering more data, and leading like the industry and the conveyancers on it. So that's quite a good report to look through, the 2030 report.
Sammy, can we look at that report as UKPA and pull out any critical parties who have been involved in structuring that? Again, I think good parties for us to be talking to. There might be some crossover with that lender chat we were just talking about as well. Yeah, any more thoughts around that area?
Yeah, on the commercial side, you do see quite a lot sort of vendor due diligence, and that can be anywhere from, I mean, you would be pretty negligent one way or the other if as a seller you were going out without having done a good job of preparing the property, and that might be anything from just at least collecting all the documents together and maybe pre-ordering searches and put them in a data room. Depending on how fast you want to go, I mean, in the fastest process, you will basically do the buyer's DD for them and offer them reliance on your report. It never quite gets there perfectly, because a buyer will always then will get their lawyers to look at your report, and then there'll be inevitably a bit of further DD. But it does get done. Yeah. Why isn't it done on every transaction? Well, partially because of a cost side. Yeah, a DD process might cost 100, 200,000. And do you want to incur that? And can you recover that from the buyer? It's always part of the sort of the negotiation. And I think the other side of it is risk. Inevitably, you're picking up as a lawyers and tax advisors and everyone can only review certain things. They need replies, they need responses, and the more you give from that as a vendor side, the more risk you're taking on. Certainly with a lot of, for instance, private equity, their funds or something looking to wind up, so they don't want to take that on.
So just bringing this,
but it is done widely, and it does speed things up significantly.
Okay, so
widely, and it does speed things up significantly.
Maybe not in maybe this might not apply necessarily then in the commercial space. I think in resi, I think the opposite is quite fair to be said. There's very little of that done pre to going to market. I think a lot of sellers, again, similar cost aversion, although much smaller figures. But I think a lot of sellers aren't really necessarily committed to doing that workload until they know they've got a buyer for their property. Just trying to bring this back to how tech can help solve that problem. Obviously, bashing everyone over the head and trying to say, right, well, you unless you get government to legislate that you literally can't put a property to market without X, Y, Z being in place. And I know at the moment, anything, particularly in the resi space, probably in the commercial as well, anything that involves regulation typically involves slowing a process down. Is there anything to be said by establishing some sort of minimum due diligence standard, whereby you could say, and these would by and large obviously be quite different for resi and commercial, but for resi, is there something to be said that we establish maybe some sort of kite mark or some sort of certified tick that says this property has got 80-90% of the due diligence prepared, pre-packaged, so that this should facilitate a transaction that will complete a third less in half the time, whatever it is. I'm just trying to think if there's a halfway step to where we want to get to, but that maybe might encourage better practice, might encourage a simpler tech solution, a more achievable tech solution in the here and now, rather than obviously what we're maybe hoping to achieve within the next 10 years, which is this access to very broad data sets. Although what a lot of you guys are saying about the councils is I don't know if that'll ever be achieved. Phil, you put your hand up.
Yeah, just where I ultimately see the market going in the UK is not dissimilar to the auction market, whereby in an ideal world, whether it be a traditional sale or an auction property, a contract for sale should be available at the time the property goes sale agreed. Okay. Now, I think through technology, and you alluded earlier to this, engaging the key stakeholders earlier in the process is key to this. The work must be front loaded. So if you engage the vendor or the seller much earlier, for example, part of the problem is that take your typical residential vendors or sellers, they do not realize what's required of them to assist their solicitor to prepare a contract. And at on many occasions, they only find out about this as they're keener to get the property to the market and on the market, as you say, to see if there's interest in the property. Where I see this going is ultimately you will get to a point, and I think we need to aspire to this, that irrespective of the nature of the sale, that a contract for sale will be available once heads of terms are agreed, and that will then allow the buyer. So the agent will give the buyer, say, 3 weeks. So there's a data room there with all the contracts for sale available, searches, etc. Go in, have a look, and you have 3 weeks to sign the contract. After 3 weeks, the agent can see whether the buyer has been active in researching the documents, and then can either decide to give them more time, or instead of waiting 2 or 3 months, which at the moment, because it's a bit like a black hole at the moment, when a heads of terms is sent out and goes to the estate agent is waiting for the contracts to come back, and that can take 2 weeks or can take 22 weeks. Whereas if the information is provided to the buyer and that they're given a particular timeline, and then the agent can say, well, look, this person has been very actively, and then you can extend the time. You're providing more knowledge to people who are part of the transaction. And that's the problem at the moment, is the lack of knowledge.
I get where you're coming from there, Philip. My concern with that is that sort of comes back to what we're saying of really the entire industry would have to accept that format for something like that to be adopted. Yeah. So what I'm wondering, what I'm trying to get us to sort of get to is maybe something, like I said, something more bite-sized, something more halfway. Because I think yes, ultimately that is where we would want to get to some sort of more cemented structure. I mean, there's lots of things to look at. You've got auctions, you've got the Scottish process, lots of transactions in Europe where, you know, you make an offer, you put your deposit down there and then, you have within a couple of.
Can I just share?
Yeah, absolutely, Dan, please.
So look, Groundshaw, we produce searches that are part of the search pack, so it's not the full search pack, and I appreciate that. Just sharing our experience, you know, we have in the past sold our, you know, so we have created certain types of products and sold them to estate agents to part serve this need. Whilst we had some limited success there, the overriding point is that, you know, estate agents don't want to market properties with bad news, and we're in the business of finding the bad news. So there's that disconnect. It's back to the principle of caveat emptor. The searches and the data that's being asked for on the buy side is to find the problems, and if there are problems, to market that data with a property for sale, you need to probably be marketing it with a solution to that problem as well. And that then requires the person on the selling side to probably do some more work and probably spend some money. And I don't know what the stats are, but obviously if you look at something like what they called the online agency, completely gone blank.
The purple one.
Yeah, the purple one. Sorry. You know, their model is all around. You know, you don't pay anything now. It's all backloaded, provided you use all our services, and then we're back into the consumer mindset versus the mindset of a commercial property person, which is I can market my property and I've got no commitment whatsoever, no costs whatsoever until such time as I've said yes to somebody and we're in a process. Some challenges there, just I thought I'd share.
I think you got a good point there, Dan. It's something that, as a business, we've kind of thought about in terms of selling searches into estate agents. And that is definitely a big problem in the disconnect from the estate agents who are not wanting to market something with some bad news. But the thing there is that bad news will always be picked up at some point, right? Yeah. The conveyancers are going to find it, you'd like to hope. So that then just slows everything down again. So the estate agent, if it falls through, the estate agent is not going to get any money anyway because it's fallen through, right? So what they kind of need to get their head around is that having more information up front is a much better way of doing it, because, as you said, they can address those issues up front. They can then potentially adjust the price, the valuation, because if that thing that has been found has an interest, creates a problem where the value is affected, then that has to be addressed at some point. If it's not addressed up front, it will get addressed at the conveyancing stage. So they just kind of need to get their head around that, I think, is the way I see it. But I'm not an estate agent, so
I think we definitely off the back of this, I think we need to look, Sammy, I think we need to look at a more agent-focused talk on this point, and I think we would need to, at that point, separate it into a resi and a commercial one, because I think otherwise we'd be talking about too many non-crossover points. But yeah, I have to say I agree with Christian there in that, you know, as an agent myself, I would rather know about a problem before I even put that property on the market, because I want to know whether there's a solution, whether my vendor is willing to, if there isn't a clear solution, whether they are willing to compromise on the transaction price or whatever. And then that's for me as an agent to decide whether I want to actually still go to market with that property and use my resources, whether I think that can get that across the line. I hear what Dan's saying, and I think what agents think and what agents do don't always match up. I think we can all readily accept that. But I think fundamentally, particularly when you're looking at the more traditional agency model, where you don't get paid until you get your deal across the line, then surely their mindset has got to come around to that way of thinking. You know, even if they're looking for larger operations, even if they're looking to sort of manage their organization, whereby they say, right, you know, we'll will only take on 10% of challenging instructions, and the 90% is going to have to meet this sort of data standard, so that we know we put that on the market at the right price. That is 99% going to get through on the due diligence stage. So I think, Sammy, definitely worth us looking at a discussion very much around, probably, I suppose we're saying the psychology more than the tech around that space.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think that we are trying to bring the solution from the commercial real estate into residential, where don't forget that commercial do have bigger budgets for due diligence, and in residential space, somebody still needs to pay for those searches before the flat is sold. So even if they are provided, then you're almost asking the seller to incur some expenses, and those expenses are no longer on success basis, as estate agents are normally paid. So another type of solution that I would maybe expect from the industry or PropTech to emerge is a completely new type of marketplace that would maybe make Zoopla, Rightmove, Evolve, or the marketplace that would completely replace the ones which I just mentioned, just because there is so much data available online on the flat that is being offered to the market that Zoopla or Rightmove are currently providing. And there are a number of players that are trying to get that information assembled into the format of property passports or code, whatever. But this information can potentially be made available immediately onto the marketplace, in fact, for free, than commercial model being similar to Zoopla. So you charge when you allow the information owners to market a given property. And this is a completely different way than transactions or due diligence is done in commercial space. And that, I feel, is more relevant in residential because of the nature of transactions being small, a little bit, like, by far more, the number of transactions is by far bigger than in commercial. And again, then it's sort of, it comes for free to the seller and buyer, and takes advantage of quite a number of data being already available online, and just buyers and sellers don't know where to look.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think something else that also springs to my mind as well is as a percentage, UK real estate, particularly resi, is very cheap compared to globally. I mean, globally the average is around 5%. We average around 1.2%, including tax, in the UK. So we're very cheap. So I would suggest that there would also be the potential to for agents to evolve their business model, to say, fine, you know, we will now do pre-listing due diligence. You will sign up with us at 3%, you know, and we will take that. You know, I think there will be agents out there who, you know, again, crunching the numbers, looking at the number of fall throughs, et cetera, what they would save in terms of having transactions go through or listings that they can complete on more, and properties to potentially avoid wasting resources on. I think if agents are willing to spend several hundred or £1,000 putting towards marketing materials for a property on the off chance that they sell it, I would suggest that an agent would be willing to spend a similar amount of money on the due diligence of a property, particularly if they're upping their fee by 50%, to then, you know, they would be able to offer the vendor that if they get through that due diligence, they would be able to offer them higher success rates, faster sale times, et cetera. They could also give their consumers more reassurance on what it is they're looking at, the data sets available. Yeah, I don't know what anyone thinks around that side. Philip?
Just a comment there in relation to where we find ourselves at the moment. While it's a very tough time, I think, for all of us, and that the uncertainty, and as human beings, none of us like uncertainty. There's a form of silver lining for us in this sphere, and I mean all of us collectively here. I mentioned earlier about the conservative nature of the industry. This is now forcing agents to look at technology sooner than they might have, because now they're looking at, because fundamentally this is going to change how people do their business and carry out their business on a day-to-day basis. So now it's going to become much more acceptable to be working from home. The two biggest costs involved for your traditional estate agent are salaries and rent. By addressing tech and how things can be done quicker, especially in the communications and the administration side of the house, I think there are savings there. So I'm finding now there are estate agents who are now talking to us who I felt were a 6 or a 12-month play down the road, but now they're sitting back and saying, and also too, you now have estate agents across the country who are in a position where they have more time on their hands. Because they're now trying to be looking at these and saying, how can I be leaner? How can I be more economical? How can I be fitter, basically, from a business perspective? So that's so there are, and I don't take any pleasure in saying that, but there are opportunities at the moment because the industry is now focusing in more on PropTech than it ever was.
Yeah, absolutely, Philip. And I think that there's nothing wrong with talking about opportunities. I think most of us, if anyone here who went through 2008 and what that rolled out will know that there was obviously horrible downsides to it, but there were some really good opportunities that came out of that and businesses that have really flourished out the back end of that. So nothing, you don't need to apologize for definitely talking about opportunities, even in scary times like this. So guys, I'm very much aware we're now into the last 10 minutes of this. Sammy, can we just circle back around just to sort of, do you mind just re-highlighting sort of the few points you said that we'll put a pin in to sort of circle back around and come back to? And then I think we'll just briefly open that up to see if there's anything else anyone here would really like us to put on that sort of action list for us to drill down into after this. And then I think we'll look to call it a day.
Yep, so I think the actions that I've got noted down are to get banks involved in the discussion, the mortgage providers and lenders, to also have a look at the report that was written by the Licence of Council Conveyors. Is that correct? I think John mentioned that, John Bennett. What was the name of the report, John?
Yeah, the CLC, the Council of Licensed Conveyancers 2030 report.
Yeah, so action to have a look at that and see what recommendations they've made. I've also got down to have a agent focused talk and just maybe split this out into both resi and commercial and just explore the differences and the challenges and the PropTech opportunities around that separately.
Great. So anyone on the floor, anything else for us as the UKPA? You know, I think what's really important for us is that we've got these sort of tangible actions that we can they might not go anywhere, but at least we can pursue and try and drill down into those. Is there anything else coming away from this that you guys would really like us to start drilling down into, particular groups of party or people that we would like to tap into, or do we feel that that's a good start, what we've got there? I'm going to take your resounding silence as no, there is nothing further to add to that list right now.
Anyone? I think if you can get the banks involved, then that'd be great, because they're traditionally incredibly difficult to engage with, and even more so actually to get any action from them out in any sensible time frame. But I appreciate in the current climate that we're in, you might get a bit more success.
Right.
Just a quick note to add as well. One thing that we're looking at doing is just bringing together the PropTech solutions on a weekly basis, just to highlight what people are doing in this current situation to help address some of the immediate challenges. So if any of our PropTech members in this chat want to share what they're doing, then please do send to Frankie. We're sort of collating that on a weekly basis and sharing that out.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sammy. Right, guys, anything else anyone wants to add? Otherwise, I think we will call this roundtable to a conclusion.